Yeah, there's a just Catherine's asked for some clarity on cognitive empathy and what we mean by that, and the tendency to maybe talk about psychopaths having cognitive empathy. Um, Often there's a consideration that psychopaths have no feeling for others, and in this way, if we can understand what empathy means, meaning, I mean, I could go into the neurological aspects of it a little bit if you needed, but we have that there are mirror neurons that allow us to feel into what's happening with another person. That's where it's derived from neurologically. And I think some people can feel into what's happening with another person and not have compassion with it. And that's what we're talking about, or feel into or know what's happening in another person uh, without necessarily having an intention for that well-being of that other person. And that's the cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy refers to knowing what's going on at a cognitive level, like to be able to see it at a cognitive level. It doesn't really kind of touch your feelings in any respect, touch your emotions in any respect. And that's how some psychopaths who may not have any concern about another person and are only thinking about their own benefit, for example, may be able to see into what's happening with another person in order to manipulate what's happening for them, in order to get what they want, rather than the person who's suffering or the person who's in that situation. I mean, I could throw a few names around, but I'd probably be better not to do that. But I think of some politicians sometimes, maybe not in Australia, but overseas, maybe even in Australia, who are very good at manipulating people. They know ways of they've been maybe even trained in ways of manipulating people, and they can detect what's going on with another person. They can know what's going on with another person in order that they can manipulate that person. So that's just my thought. Now, maybe I shouldn't have used diagnostic criteria. The narcissists, I'm not even sure. I just know that some narcissists tend to be manipulative. So maybe they got that cognitive empathy as well. Emotional empathy, different, and I'll just repeat what I was saying earlier. Emotional empathy is actually being able to feel into what's going on with another person. And I know that sometimes, I mean, I experience that often. I can feel what's going on with another person. And fortunately, I can kind of develop enough equanimity to not take it on as personal. I remember when I began doing massage many decades ago, like about 4 decades ago, over 4 decades ago, I used to massage people. Sometimes I'd come away with what they were feeling, and it was really interesting. Fortunately, I was mindful at that time, and I had these procedures where I could kind of cut myself off from feeling into or taking on what was happening with those people. It's just a number of processes that I went through, that kind of like little rituals that I used to do in order to not kind of carry around what was happening with them. And it's the same as being a psychologist now. When I listen to people, there's not a cutoff, there's not a wall, but there's a kind of, I settle back into a protective stance. And compassion, genuine compassion, is kind of protective like that. I don't need to take on the suffering of another being's experience, but at the same time, I can resonate with it, and I can know what's going on with it. And I can come from a compassionate stance, or one can come from a compassionate stance. I don't know if that helps to explain that.
No, it does help, and that actually sort of raises just some more thoughts, which is, so you're saying, so empathy, um, which I think, I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but we all have, I would think that most people have the ability to empathize
Mm.
with others on some level,
Yeah.
right? So what you're saying is, if I'm I'm just going to ask, but I say some people have a type of controlled empathy where they go in to kind of see what that person's feeling, like you said, to get personal gains from that.
Yeah.
Whereas others, like a lot of us, have just empathy for people and natural feeling for what others are going through, that's a pretty natural, normal response to situations, is feeling feeling kind of what, the climate of the room, what's happening, what's going on.
Yeah.
But compassion is I don't know, my understanding from what you're saying is the potential of taking empathy. Empathy is like that potential to grow compassion, because we have to have the empathy first to kind of feel into what's going on, and then surround it. It's almost like with this bubble of, holding whatever that
Yeah.
is in that situation, given situation. And yeah, compassion's almost just like a hug, but we don't have to bring it in, but we can hold it. Is that
Yeah. 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 Uh, Compassion is, I think it's kind of the willingness to sit with that other person's pain,
Mm.
not to fix it, just to be willing to sit with it. And it requires a lot of equanimity. Look, I mean, I'll just turn off the recording for this. I'll just mention something. Uh, when I think about my own suffering and the suffering in the world, and also remember really thinking a lot about climate change in the last 5 or 10 years or so. Uh, Sometimes it's easy to become very despairing, and I think it's better to go down the path of compassion. Uh, when you see the suffering in the world, if we can have a compassionate heart, it gives us the capacity to bear it. We're seeing it in a way where there's this enormous suffering, and we're not alone. Uh, we're being somehow connected with common humanity, and we're doing what we can. I think that's a much better response than feeling hopelessness and despair. So, I mean, and in the last year, not only is there climate change, but there's wars and there's destruction and pandemics, and wow, it's just overwhelming. So what do we do? Do we deny it? I don't think we can deny it. Are we capable of facing up to the reality of that suffering? Uh, I think compassion gives us the resources to face up to uh, the magnitude of this dukkha, this incredible suffering that's in the world. And at the same time, it helps us uh, not take it personally and find some space with it, and find a way to find some freedom with it, and help others find freedom. What else can we do? You know. Thanks, Catherine. Anybody else want to